Hello YouTube, welcome back to the channel. Now I actually had already recorded this video one time, but as it turned out, as kind of things develop, I'm going to leave a link in the description for you on Neo's Cards and Comics. He ended up going live to talk about this story, and I ended up joining him as well as Bobbles and Ball Cards and Mike Geo from Sports Card Nonsense. So we ended up having a little bit of a panel discussion conversation about it and talked about a couple different angles. So as I said, I had already recorded a video on this, but at the same time, I wanted to kind of go back through, and once I started listening to it, I realized that it almost would contradict kind of what I talked about in the live stream. I was having a little bit of fun with it conceptually, playing a little bit of devil's advocate, but I figured it would probably make sense to include that piece in the video itself so that I could at least talk about it. Now, obviously, it's pretty straightforward. At the moment, I'm recording this in the wee hours of the morning, and really not too much additional has come out. There's been some additional pieces here and there, but I'm going to touch on a few of those here. We'll call this the early speculation version, and then, of course, as things flesh out on Thursday morning and we get a little bit more information, then we'll be able to add that into and roll that into the Friday live stream more likely than not. So we'll definitely include this. This will be your Thursday morning kind of conversation from my channel, just kind of my take, initial thoughts based on it, and also from the conversations I had. And then whatever else we pick up on, we'll definitely roll that into Friday, and we'll see how that plays out on the live stream. So here it is, the Darren Rovell tweet that got the whole thing kind of launched off. It was breaking. Collectors, parent company of PSA, is acquiring greater SGC. So between them, 78% of the market for PSA, and SGC is 7% of the market according to Gem Rate. CGC has 10%, and Beckett has 4%. So those are your big four, and now it'll be kind of a big three. And obviously a big portion of it will be that PSA slash SGC combination. Now the other tweet that's included, I'm not subscribed to X here, so I'm not looking up the other tweets, but there is another one that included a little piece of information that presumably from the get-go, it is going to operate as two separate companies. And that was kind of the main portion of the conversation we had on that live stream. As I said, I'll include a link to it in the description. I join in about 15 minutes in for the duration of the live stream. And we end up talking about some of these angles. And like I said, I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit, but from the concept of running it as a separate company, kind of my pitch that I made for it. And as I said, I can see the logic to it, but I'm not, firmly entrenched with this take. But at the same time, I think it's worth discussing that if you did want to run it as two separate companies, my thought process and my main pitch for doing it that way would really come down to the idea that SGC as a brand, having been around as long as it has some value as a separate brand. And the analogy I use is talking about beer, like Anheuser-Busch owning a whole bunch of brands underneath it. And there's a bunch of other industries where this happens. Forget that. If you don't want to go beer, then you can talk about soft drinks. You've got Pepsi and Coca-Cola, but underneath Pepsi and Coca-Cola, each one of them have a clear version, 7-Up versus Sprite. They've each got a root beer. They've each got a cream soda. So you've got those combinations, but it's still owned by this parent company. So in reality, you've got quote unquote competition, but in truth, each one of these companies really owns a variety of them. And the same thing with the Anheuser-Busch and such combination. You can go up to the shelf and see all these different beers, but there's a real likelihood that it's owned by a handful of specific conglomerates that actually control it. That hasn't been the case in the grading space, but that doesn't mean you couldn't do it. And it's a couple of different ways I guess you could provide it. SGC could be kind of your value brand from the perspective of, affordable, and they've got their operations streamlined pretty well that they could have the turnaround and just give them the resources and operate it that way and let them continue to use and take advantage of the strengths they do have as a brand and as a separate company that has figured out certain type of operational efficiencies. Looking at PSA, they could just offer that additional capital to make it work even better. I understand the idea that, you could roll it into the one entity, but the main reason I said, and the main reason I took the angle of kind of the devil's advocate argument for the two separate brands idea is that if you roll it into PSA and just make it like super PSA and just make it like the Florida office of PSA, well then great. But in reality, PSA doesn't gain any brand equity from that. PSA is already what they are. They're the number one player in the space. And by losing SGC, what you're really doing, like I said, in my opinion, is I think you're just losing those folks that are anti-PSA. And those folks are, PSA never. Those folks aren't going to come over. It doesn't matter that you're rolling SGC quote unquote into it. You could have, Pete from SGC out there trying to pitch it as much as he wants, but they're going to know the differences. Now, you could also make the argument that simply being under the same umbrella as PSA and collectors automatically is going to change the perception of the brand. And it probably will. But there are still, I think, folks that would still rather, if they really like the tuxedo, then there's a real likelihood that there could be some value to keeping it around in some capacity so those folks could still have what they want. And just finding ways of combining the two so that you get to take advantage of the positives of them having separate identities, and then also the positives of having them under one umbrella from the perspective of being able to operate the business in probably the smartest possible way. All that said, you could ignore that completely and just decide to absorb it directly into it and just make the Death Star that much bigger. And obviously that's the other angle that you could take on this. So really what it comes down to, kind of high level, I do believe that the idea at first, I do agree that the idea at first, I guess, will be to operate separately. It'll be interesting to see how that is played out, how the management structures and all that gets combined, and how those pieces of it are done, and how long that lasts. But the other piece of it, really what it comes down to, and obviously it's the part that a lot of folks will fixate on. I'm not going to make any suggestion to you that it's a good thing. Obviously, you're removing a competitor from space is never really going to be good. Less competition means that there's less incentive to try as hard, and obviously it'll give them a really dominant position. But with that said, it isn't really a monopoly position because you do have other competitors in the space. You do have other options involved there. And one more thing I'll quickly add about the idea of if you go the route of PSH simply absorbing them, I do think, and I guess maybe it's maybe wishful thinking from my end, because I do appreciate their slabs out of the different ones personally. I think that could be an opportunity for CGC because they do have the capitalization, they do have a lot of things going for them, but they just haven't been able to make the traction. But if a few of the SGC folks kind of reject this combined entity, it could be an opportunity for CGC or even Beckett, honestly, probably to pick up a little bit of that market share. I guess I just don't know if it's sufficient for them to be able to pick up what PSA/SGC puts down. But I would be interested to see if the different proposition that they have in terms of value and in terms of offering allows them to be able to show you something different. And if CGC and Beckett are able to be the beneficiaries of that. And then obviously some of the other third or fourth tier graders are also probably going to have their opportunity to be able to make a pitch saying, hey, you know, if you're an SGC person who is disillusioned that they're no longer going to be around the same way you were used to seeing them, then here you go. Here's another alternative for you. So there is just some high-level thoughts from me. Really what it comes down to is this. It was a surprising move. It was surprising that it happened as suddenly as it did on a random Wednesday evening into a Thursday morning. But at the same time, it is going to make for an interesting discussion and story, and we'll definitely carry it over into the Friday. I'm not going to try to make the pitch for you that it's remotely good. Obviously, less competition is not a good thing for the consumer, so I'm not going to make that pitch to you. I did laugh, though, because I listened to one or two videos before I finally started re-recording here, and they did mention it's bad for collectors. And I go, yes, bad for collectors, but not necessarily bad for the collector's brand or the collector's company. From their perspective, it might be pretty good, and it could lead to a potential. Now, one other thing that I'll quickly include here at the end that was touched on the live stream is the possibility, and again, this is all speculation because we really don't know definitively yet what precipitated this particular move. But one thing that we did kind of discuss on the live stream is that I guess SGC in certain ways made the most sense, given that Beckett has a very complex structure with the way they're owned by that parent company. And in addition to it, CGC obviously is more than capitalized enough that they really don't need to necessarily pursue a merger of that kind. Now, the second portion of it also that we kind of brought up is that, you know, is that the first domino to fall? And does CGC possibly do something? Does Fanatics do something? Those are possibilities that can be floated out there. And then the last thing that I'll kind of include, and speaking of Fanatics, is that I guess one of the, thoughts that are being thrown out there is, was this move by collectors, above all else, not even necessarily relating to SGC, but was it a move for them to kind of block Fanatics from being able to acquire SGC and then thereby making them an even more powerful secondary competitor there, but with the finances of Fanatics that could suddenly make them very formidable? And it is an interesting take, and it's one of those things where I'd be interested to see if there is a little bit of smoke to that kind of fire, but nonetheless, it has created a very interesting situation. And as I do like to mention on this particular channel, well, we can praise the content gods for that one, and we'll definitely be doing some of that on Friday. So that's it for me. Be curious to get your thoughts, your initial takes, your knee-jerk reactions, which I'm sure there'll be some. And with that said, there'll be more videos coming up on the channel, and then live stream on Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where I'm sure this will come up. It'll be a topic of discussion for sure. That said, like if you like the video, subscribe to the channel. Thanks very much, and we'll catch you in the next one.